Doctor. Stand back here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that will determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They're my views, and well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of certainly Dr. Edgar Lucidi and his friend Frank Vasali. And we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject. Now, sometimes it's very difficult to figure out what's really going on in the world, and certainly we know, of course, we spend a great deal of money on a vast military because we have to defend ourselves against the wicked communists who are, of course, want to take away our freedom. But is that really the case? Or is it perhaps we're being lied to on many, many fronts? Because, of course, as certainly George Orwell talked about in 1984, you always had to have an enemy. You had to have an enemy of Big Brother. And, of course, Machiavelli wrote about in The Prince. The importance of having an enemy so that you could rally the people behind the king. Well, let's take you go into a little of the background. I was at a meeting a few weeks ago, and there was, as often people stop by your table, and Dr. Edgar Lucidi, I'd never met him before, and in the course of conversation, he mentioned a woman named Bella Dodd, and he had known something about Bella Dodd, who was a woman who actually had helped me to understand what's really going on. She had been a high official in the Communist Party during the Second World War, and of course the story that I had heard was that during the Second World War she had contacted an official from Moscow and said, now if we lose contact with you, how will we know what the official party line is so we can continue to serve Moscow during the war? She was a brilliant woman. She was a lawyer, but she was totally dedicated to communism because she saw all the problems we had here. And this chief communist said, well, of course, here's the telephone number for the Waldorf Astoria, and if you really get into problems, you call the Waldorf Astoria. And she found out that the people that she was to contact, if she wanted to know what the official Communist Party line were two of the richest men in the United States. And, of course, that led her eventually to renounce communism and to testify against the communists, the congressional hearings, to become a Christian. And, of course, but I never met Bella Dodd. I'd heard the stories. Well, Dr. Lucidi, of course, who's our guest this evening, knew her, and, of course, apparently his friend Frank Vasali knew her even better. So I've asked them to come on. Dr. Lucidi, are you there?
Yes, here I am.
And Frank, are you there? Frank Vasali? No, let's see. Let's get Frank on the line. Frank, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, fine. Well, now, who's going to start out telling us the story of Bella Dodd? Because who knew? Did you actually know Bella Dodd personally, Frank?
Yes, I did.
All right, fine. Well, you tell the story, because I wanted to get this recorded, and certainly all we have is what I was told by some of my friends, but I never met her. She must have been a fascinating individual. Why don't you tell us how you came to know her and what she actually told you about the relationship between the very powerful and wealthy people in the United States and our terrible enemy, communism?
I first met her at a seminar that was held in Zarephath, New Jersey, in the early part of the 1960s. She was one of the speakers. I was with a group of 6 friends. When she finished speaking, she came over to our table and introduced herself to us. On one of our visits, I asked her why she came over to us and introduced herself to us.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in a moment. Well, Frank, you go right ahead. Well, you asked her why she came over to introduce herself to you. Why?
Yes, came over and introduced herself to us. She replied, we were the youngest group in the room. We began to keep in touch with each other by phone. After a while, she invited the 6 of us to visit her at her residence on West, I believe, 28th Street. As it turned out, she had 2 apartments across from each other on the ground floor in this tenement building, which was owned by a Puerto Rican woman whom she had helped when this woman had some legal problems. Over time, this woman and her became close friends. One apartment she used to meet with her guests, the other apartment she lived in. We never went into the apartment she used to live in. We began to visit her on a regular basis, at least once a month and sometimes 2 times a month. The information she conveyed to us was quite fantastic, to say the least. She told us how she maneuvered to get one Jacob Javits elected to Congress from the 21st Congressional District, Washington Heights. Jacob Javits was brought to her law office at 100 West 42nd Street, New York, after she had received a telephone call from Jules Justin, a lawyer that she knew as a fellow communist. And during the next few months, she would receive several calls from Jacob Javits with regards to his political campaign. She decided that Jacob Javits, a former New Deal Democrat, would run as a Republican, and through the brother of her assistant, Dr. Heyman Fascenziner, who had important connections in the Republican circles. She had Vito Marcantonio, who was the big boss at the time of the American Progressive Labor Party, and he fielded a candidate, leaving the field wide open for Jacob Javits to win. And that's how he became a congressman and eventually a senator, and he always voted in favor of bills to benefit the socialist, liberal, and communist movements. As time went on, she began to tell us why she became dedicated to the Communist Party. And she said that she was so disturbed how the working man was
well, Frank, hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment here.
Okay.
Well, this is Dr. Stan, and we're talking to Frank Vasali, and he had known Bella Dodd, who was really one of the key people in helping me to understand what is really going on in the world today. Even though I never met Bella Dodd, I've heard many stories about her, but I've never met anybody who knew her well, and apparently Frank did. And of course, Bella Dodd, a lawyer, a very intelligent woman, was very concerned about the injustice that she saw in our society, and the fact that there were a lot of people of great wealth who were exploiting the individuals, and certainly there was injustice in our society, certainly back in the 1930s and 1940s, and there is injustice in our society today. But idealistic people sometimes can embrace philosophies they really don't understand. And so Bella Dodd gradually came into the orbit of communism, who pointed out all the injustices of our society, all the problems in our society, and they promised to remedy those problems by bringing communism to America, and eventually the state would wither away, and we would have equitable distribution of products, and the people would live better. And so was it this sort of philosophy that brought her into communism there in the years leading up to World War II?
Yes.
You go right ahead, Frank.
Yes, she didn't understand why the working man suffered so much during the Depression in '29, when they had very little to do with the process of the economy. And she fell into the orbit of the communists. And then she took a trip to Europe in the 30s, and she seen the fascists how they were very harsh in their maneuvers to take power, and she became a staunch anti-fascist. Now, as time went on, she got very high in the Communist Party. She never carried a card, and there were certain people who were writing the articles about her that she was a communist. And she was married to a U.S. Army Air Force officer. They had a child. And he was going to sue some of the people that were writing these articles about her.
Well, wasn't she on the Central Committee of the Communist Party?
Oh, yes. She got very high. She got very high in it. And they decided to have her, what they call, coming out.
All right, I'm gonna ask you, Frank, just to hold your telephone just a little bit further away from your mouth, so we get clear.
Is that better?
That is ever so much better. Thank you so much. I think this story is so important. Please go right ahead. So the communists decided to have her come out. Go right ahead.
Yes, and they issued her a card and made it publicly known that she was a communist. And she told us her husband told her to leave the Communist Party. She has a family. She has a son. And she told her husband that the Communist Party was her family. And he left with the kid, and she never seen the kid anymore. But when we were seeing her son graduated a military school. I don't know which one it was, the Army or the Navy or whichever one it was. And she went to see him graduate, but never went close to him. And after he graduated, she just left and came back to New York. And she then went on to say that the higher she got in the Communist Party, she dealt less and less with communists. She dealt more and more with representatives of the Rockefellers, Lehmans, Harrimans. And at that time, they were dealing with Russia even though we didn't recognize Russia. The Harrimans were making, the Lehmans were making deals for the magnesium to take the magnesium mines and the products from the magnesium mines from Russia, and the Rockefellers with the oil and gas, and so on and so forth. And then she began to realize that what the Communist Party was really doing was not to help the downtrodden people and benefit their life, but to lay the groundwork for a one-world government, a global one-world government. And this so disillusioned her. And then she testified against them. And Bishop Sheen, he was a Monsignor at the time, brought her back into the Catholic religion. And she had wrote a book, School of Darkness.
Right.
I had seen the original manuscript, which was never printed. It was as thick as a Webster Encyclopedia dictionary. But what they printed, a Catholic publishing house printed a book called The School of Darkness, but only pieces of it, and mostly pertaining to her reconversion to the Catholic faith. And then I went away on vacation, and when I came back, she had died. Well, the communists had told her when she testified, they told her, Bella, you were a top communist for 19 and a half years. We will allow you to be a top anti-communist for 19 and a half years.